Fine face. Good face. Fine face. Good face. Fine face.
And it gets your face like warmed up.
Super serious.
Where nothing fun or funny ever happens.
This is a super serious thing.
I don't even like dogs.
All right. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Super Serious Dog Podcast, hosted by myself, Misha Bielitsky, and Courtney Cuellar.
What's your name again?
Misha. I almost said Michelle for some reason. I was doing a lot of paperwork because for those of you who don't know, my real name is actually Michelle. Misha is just a nickname I've gone by my whole life. And so, yeah, I just sometimes every once in a while I trip up on my own name and feel really adult-like. Or I feel like people are going to think I'm lying. I don't know if that's your real name.
Sorry, I just had to call you out on that.
No, totally. I appreciate that. So last time we were talking about hiking and stuff.
Yeah.
Have you been hiking in the last week?
I have. I did. I went on a hike. It was really good for me and my dogs to get back out there in nature. I had taken some time off because a lot of people were hiking and the trails were a bit crowded and I wasn't able to enjoy them to the fullest like I had been when they were empty, you know? So I went out last week and hiked and it was nice. And I saw a couple people, but they seemed to be working with their dogs and they kept their dogs to themselves and they were having a good time with their dog. And that was really cool to see, was some people out there enjoying the trails appropriately.
That's awesome. That also must have been a nice burden lifted off your shoulders, right? Just not having that stress of oh my God, is there going to be a dog running around the corner any given second?
Right.
Full speed.
Right.
I was thinking about earlier how a lot of people take their dogs off leash and they don't necessarily have off leash control, but their dogs don't necessarily wander away, right? So those sort of in between dogs, they'll wander, they'll run off, but they always come back and they always know where their owner is. And I was just thinking about that earlier. I don't know why it just popped in my head, but I feel like those are kind of, I don't know if that I'd say the worst case scenario, right? Because it's not. Obviously, worst case scenario is some aggressive dog running around who shouldn't be off leash or off muzzle.
Right, but I know what you mean by that because it gives you a false sense of security that your dog will listen and does listen because it always comes back. He never wanders too far.
Right.
But have you been through a situation where they saw a dog and did take off, or they saw a squirrel and did take off?
Mm-hmm.
That could happen. And if you haven't practiced, like what we were talking about in the last episode of getting practice in and the repetition and calling your dog back, you might not have it when you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things too. It's I understand why people have that comfort, right? I personally wouldn't because I usually have client dogs, but also my dogs are weirdos. So I don't ever want them out of my sight. But also that if they go and run off and they always come back, that's fine. But I would rather be doing the hike together. I want us to be together.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I don't want it to be you go do your thing and I go do mine. That it's a different mindset. It's a different mentality. And I think it's important to it's okay if your dog has that tendency, right? And you want to give them that freedom because they've established a pattern of being reliable and they come back and they don't get into trouble. And, if you whistle a certain whistle, they will come, right? You have that panic button potential recall that you could potentially rely on. But I see the downside of that mentality, right? Of just making it to where anything goes. Is that an alarm going off?
Yeah.
Nice. It should be a together thing and it should be something that you guys do together and enjoy together because it's only going to strengthen your bond, your relationship, et cetera. And I was kind of heading towards is that there's different breeds, right? That have different needs. And I know there's a lot of preconceived notions. So what do you think about some of those preconceived notions? I've heard people say Great Pyrenees will never be off leash or a Husky should never be off leash.
Yes, or like a sight hound should never be off leash.
Right.
Things like that.
Right.
I've definitely heard those. I don't know that I believe them to like a factual degree. Because I know the exceptions to the rules. I know the huskies and the sight hounds and whatever. I know a lot of dogs that have been off leash that had the predisposition to not be able to. I think it's something that if you own one of those breeds, you should factor in. Like, why should a sight hound not be off leash? Well, because it has really high prey drive and its predisposition to chase after something that runs. So if it sees something running in the distance, it's likely going to take off. It's going to go full in prey drive, and it's going to be hard to get its attention in that moment. Right. Or like Pyrenees are very independent dogs, kind of stubborn, kind of aloof, kind of do their own thing. So you need, and that's two completely different reasons of not being off leash. So if you own those breeds, you need to know those predispositions and make sure that before you let your dog off leash, you've worked through those kind of scenarios a bajillion times, you know?
Yeah, it's understanding that biological imperative and not making an assumption. Because, don't get me wrong, I love it when a client comes to me and has really low expectations, like they have brand new puppies and they know it's a husky, and so it'll never be off leash. So even if we worked at it every day for the next 2 years, it still might not be a possibility. Like, I love when people come to me with that mindset. But that doesn't have to be true. That doesn't have to be the case. So long as you've practiced, you've worked on it, and especially if you've got puppies. Puppies should be easy to kind of really deeply instill that pack drive at a young age. I mean, especially if they're teeny tiny, like you don't even need a leash at a certain age because they're teeny tiny. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
And if they do go somewhere, you just catch them.
Right. You can cover more ground than them when they're a certain size.
Yes. When and I'm talking like 2 months.
Yeah, I was going to say like under 4 months, because once a dog gets like 5-6 months, do not underestimate the speed they can travel.
They will go fast. They're teenagers, right? They're hitting puberty and they have all the hormones and all the things and all the I'm going to go be independent now.
Yeah.
That actually is kind of a good point too, is a lot of people think that, age plays a factor, like, oh, my dog's too old to learn something new, or they think, oh, my dog's a year old, so that's a year, so that's a good milestone. It's time for you to be an adult, but that's not really an adult for most dogs.
Yeah, a lot of dogs mature at different speeds, and it can depend on their breed. It can depend on a lot of things. It can depend on their environment they grow up in, their mental capacity, their mental fortitude. Like Malinois probably mature pretty quickly compared to a Corso. They don't mature till they're like 3, and that's just a difference in breed.
Yeah, for sure. How did because you've had Phoebe since she was a puppy, and then have you had any of your other dogs since they were puppies?
No.
Okay, so but you've taught a lot of your dogs recall. What are some different ways that you taught like Reddy versus Phoebe, who was a puppy that you had since she was a puppy? Sorry.
Right. So Reddy came to me at almost a year old with some behavioral issues and way more energy than he knew what to do with. So I made sure I was important, that I had things that he wanted. So whether that was toys or food, I did a lot of training to set up where he was, away from me, whether someone was holding him at a distance or he was on place or in a sit stay or down stay, and calling him to me from a short distance and making it successful. And I had something he really wanted, so that coming to me was a super fun game for him, because he is a super fast dog that wants to have fun all the time. Yeah. So he needed to know that I was something super fun. Whereas Phoebe was a tiny puppy when I got her, and I was the coolest person she'd ever met. So if I walked 6 feet one direction, she wanted to come with me. So I just incorporated a word with that. But it was pretty natural in her to do it, because puppies have that pack drive pretty naturally.
Yeah, especially if you're already working on that and it's something that you're going to want in the future. I've had a lot of people recently say, oh, I know they're too young for this. And they have like a 4-month-old dog and they're talking about starting obedience and stuff. And I'm like, not at all. In fact, the sooner the better. I mean, not saying like, slap any old tool on your puppy or whatever, but like just teach them stuff. It's the easiest time to teach them things. They like food. They you're imprinting them, so to speak. I mean, that's not really the proper use of that word, but still, right? Like just for lack of a better term, you're imprinting on them what you want them to do later.
Yeah, Phoebe didn't eat out of a bowl for the first 5 months I had her. So every meal she had came out of my hands. And even though I wasn't asking her to hold a sit while I walked around the room at, 10 weeks old, I was luring her body into a sit position, and then she got the food. It was marking and rewarding and just teaching her the different positions I may want her in the future before I gave them a name.
Yeah. Why did you choose to hand feed her for so long?
To get that practice in of the different positions I'd want her in, to build that relationship, that importance, to build the engagement that I wanted, to have control over every positive experience I wanted her to have.
That's cool. That's pretty neat. And now Phoebe is a hiking fiend.
Yes.
she thinks that every hike is a race.
Yes. Hiking is the coolest thing to her, and she's going to be the best and the fastest and the most awesomest at it.
Uh-huh. And she likes to just run and take all the dogs with her and do all the things.
Yep.
It's pretty funny. So for those of you that don't know, Phoebe is like, how do I put it? Well, she's named after the character in Friends, right? Because she's just like super friendly and happy-go-lucky and like kind of ditzy and whatever.
And to be fair, like I didn't know her personality was going to be that much like that character when I named her. It was just one of those things where we were throwing around names for like 2 weeks, and I was like, I need to name this puppy. And for some reason, Phoebe stuck. And then in my head, it was kind of after the character, but I didn't expect her to go that far.
It sort of morphed into that. Like it wasn't totally a self-fulfilling prophecy, but kind of.
Yeah.
So Phoebe is like the most gregarious, most like everybody is amazing and awesome and wonderful, and she has to be friends with all of them, whether it's dog or human, whatever, doesn't matter. So to combat that, right? Like, tell me what are some downsides of that when you're hiking?
Well, she wants to say hi to everyone. So when we see someone in the distance, a person, not as much the dog, she wants to see the person.
She's more about people.
Yeah, she has enough dogs in her life. She's like, I don't even need new friends. But she does want to meet all the people. And we talked about this a little bit on our Patreon episode.
That's right.
Of how I wanted her to like people as a puppy. So I actually encouraged this behavior, and it's backfired because she sees someone and she wants to bolt to them and be the little wiggly, jumpy dog that she can be. And I have to constantly make sure I know where she's at when we're approaching a person, because she'll take any opportunity to just squeeze out for some pets that maybe she'll get. Yeah.
So one of the cool things that you taught her is the word slow.
I did teach her slow. So what slow means to Phoebe is that she has to walk at least behind the dog in front. So sometimes when I'm doing pack hikes, I will have, 8 dogs on average. Sometimes I ask them to all walk behind me, but other times I give them the freedom to go, at whatever pace within my sight they'd like to be. Phoebe, like you mentioned, likes to run to the very front of the pack and go the farthest, the fastest. And that can pull the whole pack forward away from me, which makes it not an us thing. It makes it the pack hiking, and I'm trying to keep up with them thing. So teaching Phoebe slow was to get her to walk at least behind the furthest most front dog.
Just not have her up front.
Not have her up front. And that was a very difficult process because Phoebe also always wants to get the answer right. So she assumed that if I was telling her something when she was out ahead, that I was telling her to come to me, because
Right.
that's what we had practiced the most. That's what I had reinforced the most, was if I call you, I want you to come all the way to me.
Right.
But I don't want her to walk right next to me or be focused on me. I want her to be enjoying the hike and sniffing and walking at a reasonable pace. So I had to teach her that comfort middle area by keeping her on a leash and guiding her in front of me and telling her slow and not letting her get beside me, but also not letting her go ahead of the frontmost dog.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like, because who teaches their dog that? Like, nobody really teaches, like, the average person wouldn't teach their dog something like that unless they're doing a cool trick like bark and whisper and that kind of thing, But it's really, really fun to watch her in that moment because she knows it. She knows it deep in her soul, but it requires so much concentration on her part. Like, you could probably hike like a quarter of the amount you would normally hike without her running and just in a slow, and she would be wiped after that.
Because it requires a lot of focus. She has to pay attention to where that dog's at, pay attention to where I'm at, adjust her speed accordingly, and not get caught up in, what's that smell? What's that movement in the bush, and take off and be the leader that she thinks she wants to be.
Yeah. What kind of drove you to teaching her that?
Frustration.
What were you just most frustrated by her, like, pulling the pack of dogs out of sight?
Yeah. Because then I was having to recall her so frequently, and so I'd recall her, she'd come back to me, and I'd release her out of a heel position, and she'd take back off to the front, and I'd have to recall her again, and it was just over and over again, and I was like, this is frustrating me. And what I've found in dog training is that if you, the person, gets frustrated, you're not doing any good. You need to step away from the situation and figure out what is a solution. So the first solution I came up with, honestly, was to just have her walk next to me the whole time. But that's not fun.
It's not fun. And then that's more of a heel, and it's like, who heals on a hike?
Right. And then there's opportunities to play and stuff that she's missing out on, and she's not getting the full enrichment. And that was frustrating for both of us. Yeah. So
I'll bet.
One day on a hike, I just decided I'm gonna not let you pass the dog in front, and I'm also not gonna let you walk next to me, and thus Slow was born.
Yeah, It's funny. It's funny how frustration is a really good motivator for things, right? Like,
it sure is. It sure is.
Like, I've been sitting on my butt for a while now, sitting in quarantine and stuff, and like, nothing's really been frustrating. So I haven't been doing as many like little side projects because I got time. It's whatever. It's not a big deal. But yeah, frustration's a really good motivator. And I think that's something too that people don't understand how to capitalize on either. Because frustration can be used to your benefit. You frustrate a dog enough and then let him go at the toy. He's going to really enjoy playing with that toy, for instance. And a lot of people often call us when they're in a frustrated position, but they feel hopeless, right? So they've kind of gone too far in that frustration. Right. And I think it's also interesting too, how like people want to prevent frustration in their dog at all costs. That's why they hire dog walkers, and they come home for lunch and take their dog out, and they try to buy all the cool latest gadgets and lick mats and, cameras that also spit out toys and just random stuff to keep their dogs occupied, when really it can come down to something as simple as you're not frustrated enough, or you're not recognizing that your dog's too frustrated to change something.
Right. And there's also a lack of knowing how to deal with frustration.
Right.
Whether that be in the human or the dog, that depends on that specific scenario and relationship. But frustration is something you have to learn to cope with and deal with, and find a way to find that positive path, because you can. I compare everything to a dog, right? You can be a frustrated dog and you can chase your tail, and you can chase it and you can chase it and you can chase it. And sometimes you're going to catch it, and other times you're just going to get real dizzy and fall down. Or you can take that frustration and you can chase a ball or a toy or a bird or a squirrel. You can use that frustration to create something. Like I used that frustration I was having with Phoebe to create Slow. And
Yeah.
I didn't even think it was that cool until he pointed it out. So thanks. So, you know, if you're a human, maybe, and you feel frustrated often, maybe you need to step back away and realize there is a path out of frustration if you'd like to leave it. I think some people get addicted to, not addicted to the failing of frustration, but you know what I mean? Like if you're chasing your tail enough and you fall down, you're kind of like, huh, that was kind of funny.
You get hopeless. You get in this weird, hopeless, negative feedback loop.
Right.
And you're just like, my dog can't be fixed. Whether you're consciously thinking those words or not, some part of you is feeling like this can't be fixed. I've tried everything, right? And for that person, they probably have tried everything, especially when it comes to hiking. Like that is probably one of the biggest things, especially here in Austin, that people come find dog trainers for, is they're like, I just want my dog to be good off leash.
Right.
Aside from behavioral issues. Like I'm not talking about that because there's lots and lots of that too. When somebody has a generally good dog, recall is that last piece of the puzzle. They want to go hiking with their dog, or
they want to go to Zilker Park or whatever and be able to, you know, do the things they see other people doing with their dog, having them off leash and enjoying them and hiking and stuff like that. And I'd say that recall is a huge thing I get calls for. And it's all about being important in the environment.
Yeah. You know what I find interesting is that a lot of people don't know what the term recall means. I often have to explain that.
I throw a lot of people off with that. I mean, like, like coming to you, recalling them back to you.
Yeah.
Isn't that where the term came from? Recall?
Yeah, I think so. I always kind of assumed it was like a duck hunter's term or something like that, or people who do like bird dog stuff, gun dog stuff, because you're sending them away to go get it, and then you're recalling them back to you. So you're calling out to them and then recalling them. That's my assumption, but I have no idea. It could be something totally different. But yeah, that's I always have to. Coming when called. I always have to like put that disclaimer on it and like put it in parentheses in my emails and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with hiking in the summer when it starts getting really, really hot?
I either go early in the morning or I go late at night. I bring water for myself and water for the dogs. I wear comfortable clothing that's going to protect me from the environment if it needs to, depending on where I'm hiking, what the terrain is like, you know, so I'll probably still wear hiking shoes if I'm going to be walking on, you know, loose gravelly rock and stuff. I don't typically wear shorts, but I might, you know, like I said, depending on the terrain. If it's somewhere I'm going to walk through a lot of brush, no shorts. Bring a backpack, water, first aid kit, all that kind of stuff. If possible, I like to go in creeks and creek walk. That's super fun. I had to figure out a system for shoes though. Last year I got a ton of blisters because
I thought you were going to say you had pinky shoes.
Well, that happened too. Yeah, that happened too. It was a whole complicated thing. But yeah, so I came up with a system where I have water shoes that I walk in the creek with and hiking shoes that I hike with, and I just switch.
Do you bring the shoes with you? Or do you just like... Yeah, creek walking is really cool. That's something I never would have thought to have done until I saw you doing it. Because it's a nice way to cool your dogs off if you've got that water source and they get to run around, and they have a drinking water source as well. And it also cools you down a little bit too.
And it works on your balance.
Yeah, that's true. You got to get really good at not slipping on mossy rocks.
And recovering quickly if you do stumble. And you get to laugh when you fall in the water.
And get cooled off too.
Yeah, it feels nice.
Are there any dogs that you don't hike during certain types of year or certain times of the year, like a brachiocephalic dog or anything like that?
Definitely any brachiocephalic. I can never say that word right.
I know, I can't either. Bracky dogs.
The squish face dogs?
Squishy face, yes.
A dog trainer friend of mine told me that I sound unprofessional when I say squish face dogs, so I had to learn how to say brachiocephalic. So, law.
I think that's a target market thing. Like you know your audience, right?
Right.
If somebody else is using words like that, use those. But if they say go potty, then you can say go potty too. It's fine.
Do your business.
So PC.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely none of them. If you have one of those breeds and you want to take your dog out in the summer, you need to research what the signs of heat stroke are and keep your dog cool, or just don't go and make it a short hike regardless. Yeah, that's probably the only place I draw the line. Any short breeds like a Dachshund or a Pomeranian that's going to be really close to the ground, it would depend. It would be a case by case basis because it's going to depend on their age, their allergy level, their conditioning to hiking. Because they're so close to the ground, a lot of dust gets kicked up if it's a dusty trail. They're also right down there where the ground is retaining heat, so they're getting more heat on their bellies. So, like I said, it'd be a case-by-case basis on the shorter, closer to the ground breeds.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last year, we had a big deal with the blue-green algae in Austin. Yes. And that was pretty scary because if anybody doesn't know, it's a toxic algae that tends to hang out in more stagnant water and is pretty prevalent, like flourishes in the heat, essentially, in these nice calm cesspools. And when that's the only drinking source, a dog goes and drinks it, ingests it, and they have seizures and ultimately die.
And from what I heard, they die like the same day.
Yeah, it's
pretty quick.
It's a rapid thing. It's not like you can catch it quickly and that kind of thing. So I know for a while you had to take a break last year. How did you deal with that?
How'd I deal with it?
Yeah. So I'm sure that must have sucked having to suddenly go, uh-oh.
It did. Well, what happened was, so through June and July, it was getting hotter. And I noticed that the creeks were starting to get dry. So I was making my hiking routes specifically to where we, checked in with the water frequently to keep the dogs cool because there wasn't a ton of water and it was starting to get hotter. And I actually decided to stop hiking August and September of last year because it was so hot and there was not enough water in the creeks where I went. And I just didn't feel like I could adequately keep myself and the dogs hydrated. And it was my first year of a hiking business, so I just wanted to be on the safe side. And that was luckily before any cases of blue-green algae had come up, because I think the first case had come up in August. So luckily I had already stopped my hiking for the season. When that came up, I was pretty terrified to go back to hiking. They were testing the water regularly, and what they found was that if it's moving water, you're safe. You're very, very likely safe. If it's stagnant water, you're not. So I found some new hiking trails that had some moving water and started back up in October of last year. Going forward, I don't really know what that's going to look like because of a lot of reasons, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure it's kind of funny talking about going back to hiking after the blue-green algae incident, because that kind of feels a lot like going back to work and returning to normal right now, even though we're in this weird limbo of yes, we need to reopen so the economy can continue to churn without us pumping fake money into it, but also we need to be safe and protect everybody's health. And so we're in this weird in between, and you don't know what it's going to be like.
Yeah. And when I went back, they had reported that it cleared up, the temperatures were dropping, so the blue-green algae was dying and all this stuff. But, when I'd go and I'd see any kind of algae or growth in water, I looked at it a little suspiciously. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's because it's scary. I don't want my dogs to die. That's definitely not what I want. That's not why I'm here.
Right. And it's also just, it's a little panic inducing. That would give me a tiny heart attack if my dog went over and just even started sniffing it. I'd be like, no, get away from that. Don't do that. Bad dog, bad. Just kidding. That's not how I train, but
I'm sure that's exactly how you'd react.
Yes. Yeah. No, totally. No. That's exactly how I sound all the time. So cool. Well, that was fun talking about hiking. I miss hiking a lot. I haven't done it in a while, so I'm gonna cut in a week or two.
we'll have to get back out there soon.
Yes.
Nice.
It feels like forever. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, if you guys have questions or anything like that you want us to answer, you can email us at superseriousdogpodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to check out our Patreon as well, where you can support us, but also you get early release of episodes. You also get an extra episode. It's also a bit longer. We have a really, really cool interview up right now with our friend and former colleague, whatever. Either way, she's our friend and she's a great dog trainer. And so you can check that out on Patreon.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, Courtney?
That's all. We
Dope.
look forward to having more guests and answering more questions. And
and next week we have a puppy episode coming out where we interview Adrian Liddell. So you can also check that out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right,
Cue the
cool.
music.